Hello. I'm Jamon Holmgren, and as you can see there, I made a little modification to my slide after practicing a few times. It may be a little tough to even get in 25 minutes, but I have a lot of content here. As Sarah said, it's a little difficult to install React Native. I'm not going to do that in front of you. It's already installed and running. I am Jamon Holmgren. Yes, my name does mean ham in Spanish. So if you're from Spain, you can call me Jamon, but everybody else just call me Jamon. I'm the co-founder and CTO of Infinite Redware Consultancy. I also am on the React Native open source core team, which means I work on React Native and React Native community packages, but I don't work at Facebook. And you can find me on Twitter at Jamon Holmgren. I live in the USA. I come from the Pacific Northwest near Portland, Oregon. I live kind of out in the country with my wife and 4 kids, and I work from home, as do almost pretty much everybody at Infinite Red. A little bit about Infinite Red. We're mostly in the US and Canada. We do mobile web design, react.js, React Native, and we're starting to do some AI and machine learning stuff, which is pretty cool, but we're mostly known for our React Native work. You can also find us at Chain React. We put on a conference. It's focused on React Native. It's happening July 2020. Okay, so goal of this talk, I'm going to be going through a lot. This is a lot of information happening. I'm just mainly trying to get you inspired to check out React Native itself. Actually, who all here has done any sort of significant amount of work in React Native? Okay, we've got a few. So trying to get more React people to try out React Native, because it is it's a lot like React. Now there's definitely some challenges and some things that you need to know about the native side, but you can kind of be introduced to those things slowly. I also want people to know about MobX State Tree. MobX State Tree was created by Michel Westrate, who I think is from the Netherlands, and it's a very cool system. But most people use Redux, and I want to let people know that there's an alternative out there that we've found. We used to use Redux, and we moved to MobX State Tree, and we've been very happy. I also want to show off the Ignite CLI and the Bowser React Native boilerplate. Ignite basically is a CLI. You'll see it in action where you can generate new projects and be kind of up and running very quickly. And then Bowser is the boilerplate that we have for React Native. It's the latest one. So what we're going to build today is a React Native app for viewing and favoriting players on the 2019-2020 Portland Trailblazers NBA team. So I live near Portland. I'm an NBA fan. That's basketball for those of you from Europe. What's basketball? It's sort of like football, but you just make the goal a lot smaller. You put it up high, make the players a lot taller, and then you actually score more than 2 goals. So I came up to the stage to one of my favorite songs, and this is another kind of piece of that. When I hear or see the word mistake, I think we don't make mistakes, we have happy accidents, because I'm going to be live coding here, so you're going to see a lot of happy accidents. All right, let's jump into it. Oh, those are my daughters. So what you see here is, let's see, this is not where I put it. Let me get this lined here. So what you see here is the iOS simulator running a React Native app, as well as a Pixel 2 Android emulator. This is what you get when you run Ignite new whatever app. And you can choose a few things, like do you want detox end-to-end tests, but I've already done that because you don't want to sit here and watch it like install node modules and things like that. On the right here is a cool desktop app that we made called Reactatron. It works for both React and React Native. It works with Redux and MobX State Tree. You should check it out. I'm not going to be showing it off too much in this talk, but you'll see it in action a few times. So this app is basically for me to kind of get to know like the new roster. There's a new season coming up for the Portland Trailblazers. I want to know the new players that are going to be a part of it. So we have some data, and I'm going to just use a local file, a JSON file that I have, but you can kind of envision this being like an external API that we're reaching out and pinging and getting some data back. During this talk, you're going to see me wiring up a lot of data and passing it through to 2 different screens and seeing them kind of talk back and forth using the application state. This talk does have some kind of advanced concepts. You probably don't, like if you don't understand, if you're more of a beginner in React or in some cases React Native, you don't have to understand everything that's happening here. What I want you to do is glean the pieces that you do that do make sense to you throughout this talk. So let's go ahead and drag this in. Let's see. So we have a models directory that's already set up for us. Again, this is just a bare like Ignite browser project. I'm going to drop in the player data. You can see here that we have our different players as a JSON file. Yusuf Nurkic is the first one, so I'm going to actually copy this in because we need to modify our RouteStore. RouteStore is basically something that's set up by Ignite for you. It's a MobX state tree store that contains basically all of your application state. Out of the box, it doesn't come with much. It's just handling your navigation, but we're going to modify that right now. So what we want to do is create a new data model. Export const. And this types object that you get, types.model, comes from, whoops, that's not what I meant to do. Yes, it is what I meant to do. This comes from MobX state tree, and it gives you basically the ability, think of it like prop types in some ways. It's runtime types. It allows you to define what types you have coming into your data structures. These are all types.string, and this last one, as you can probably imagine, is types.number. Actually, this top one, I'm going to change to identifier, types.identifier. So far so good. We have a player. They have a name. There's a link to like their player page. There's an image URL, their height. Unfortunately, I didn't convert it to centimeters, so it's going to be in feet and inches. And their age, which I think is the same here in Europe as well. You never know. You can't find like regular water here. It's all like bubbly. I don't get that. Players. So types.array, we're going to have a bunch of players, right? So player model. So types.array just says we're going to have a bunch of these models. By the way, we are using TypeScript here. So I'm going to show right now, actually, how you would derive your TypeScript types from your runtime types. So instead of RouteStore, we're going to have player. So basically, this instance type of player model will give you your types from your runtime types. You don't have to like define another interface or another type for the rest of your app. We now are done with our TypeScript part of it. All right, so we have our players, but we also need to, we've defined the shape of the data, like the data in the store it contains some players, but now we actually have to populate it. So MobX state tree has a concept called actions, and I'm going to, basically this is the format here. I'm going to use a thing called after create. Now you can define your own actions, and we will in a bit here, but this one's a special one. This one gets called by default. It's like a lifecycle method. You can think of MobX state tree as being React for your data, because you've kind of got this, you've got lifecycle methods and things like that. So self is a reference to the RouteStore, and I'm going to say it's already auto-completing for me, so self.players equals player data, and I'm going to actually grab that from player data, require player data.json. So why are we using require here instead of import? I'm not going to go into that. We do need to actually access the player's property within our data. So how do we know that this worked? Well, I can come back here and, oh, nice. Refresh, and refresh here. I can look in Reactitron, and I can see that we actually have players populating our model. Awesome, Kent Bazemore. Very, very cool. So Reactitron allows you to inspect your store and kind of manipulate and do a bunch of other cool stuff. So there you see it in action. So But this doesn't look quite right. I don't know if you can tell, but it's actually kind of a purplish color. Purple is not the Trailblazers color. That's more like Lakers, and that cannot stand. So I'm going to go to the welcome screen here and start ripping stuff out. So we're not going to have the wallpaper, but we do need a background of some sort, so I'm going to come in here. So if you're not familiar with React Native, it comes with its own kind of styling system. It's very much like CSS in JS, but there are a few changes. So background color, and I'm just going to go 232323. Sid, look away. I'm hard coding values here. So you can see it's now a gray background. That's the wrong logo though. So let's grab the right logo, Blazers, and I'm just going to drop it right in here. Instead of Bowser, we're going to go with Blazers, and then on here we're going to go Blazers logo. And yay, there's our Trailblazers logo. And now we want to rip out a few other things. We're going to change this text here to, so like text it's a built-in component that comes from React Native, but we've actually modified it in Ignite browser to have some other properties. Like you can actually do internationalization right out of the box and things like that. It's very cool. Trailblazers roster. Just going to get rid of a couple of these things. Don't need that. Don't need this. Don't need this. Oops, no spotlight. Okay. And there, it's cleaned up. This one's not refreshing for some reason. So what we want to do now is put we have all the players, right? So we want to list them out. And React Native comes with a thing called flatlist. Flatlist has a very simple API. List. And what you do is you provide it with data. Okay, we're going to come back to that in a second. I'm just going to go like that. And you also have a RenderItem property. RenderItem property receives you provide it with a function that it will call, and then you need to return a React component. I'm going to destructure a thing called item. It's a property within the argument that you get there. And I'm going to use text to output item.name. But we need data here. So I'm going to use a very cool feature of Ignite. RouteStore equals use stores. Okay, so use stores is like a custom hook, or actually React context, that will grab the RouteStore and provide it to you. Now you can access within the RouteStore other stores. You know, if you have screen-specific stores, or you know, some of our projects have 15, 20 stores. But in this case, we're just going to go with the RouteStore. So we have access to the RouteStore. All we have to do is RouteStore dot, and you can see here it's already pre-populating what I have, dot players. So let's go back and see. There we go. Awesome. We've got the names of the players on both iOS and Android, just like that. We want to make those clickable though, because I want to be able to drill down and actually, let me back up. What I want to do first is put their avatars, their faces next to each item. So I'm going to wrap this in a view. View is like a div for you web developers. Please prettier, yes, okay. So, and I'm going to go style equals player row, and the text is going to be style equals player name. And we're going to add an image. Source equals, and we're going to pull it from a URI, which is going to be item dot, and as you can see here, image. And we need a style on that as well. Style equals player image. We need these three constants to be defined. Whoops. Whether you put your kind of like your styles all in one. Whoops, wrong button. all in one place, or if you like put them in a separate file and import them, that's up to you. For the purposes of this, I'm just going to keep everything in one place. So I think the main thing here is we want to make sure that our flex direction is, oops, it's not giving me autocomplete. View style. Okay. Flex direction is row. So this is one of the differences between React Native and React Web. Flex direction is column by default because generally you're in a phone context and you want things to kind of flow this way. But on web, obviously things are going kind of in a row. In this case, we want an image and then a text box in a row format, so we're going to do that. Player image is going to be width of, say, 50, height 50. Player name, we're going to do padding 20, font size 20. Actually, let's go about 15 here. And let's see how that looks. Okay, not too bad. This is not a design talk. Okay, but we can't click on anything. We can scroll, but we can't click on anything. Actually, by the way, I'm scrolling the wrong thing. I need to change this to fixed. Okay. Okay, now we can just scroll this. But we can't click on anything. So let's make these clickable. Instead of view, there's a thing called Touchable Opacity, which is a really long word. That just means button, basically. So it is a touchable element. It's a view underneath the hood, but when you tap on it, it'll change the opacity. So if I save this and let that refresh over there and I tap, whoa, that's not what's supposed to happen. You can see, I think, that it is kind of like, it's giving you some feedback as you tap it. It should happen also over here if I refresh. Yes. So touchable opacity also comes, like any button, it also comes with some events, and I am going to use the OnPress event. You can provide it with a function to run, and this is where we're going to use this props.navigation.navigate thing. So this is React Navigation. React Navigation, by the way, I was just in Poland, and they at React Native EU, and they announced that they're doing a new API for it that's actually much nicer than what you're going to see in this talk. So take a look at that. Navigate to details. So we're going to go to a details screen. Now this is where Ignite is helpful, because we can say Ignite generate screen details, and it'll actually generate the new files. Basically, you have a new folder, a couple new files in the folder, and yeah, so there's your stuff there. So make sure that this works. If I click on, let's see, I didn't wire something up here. Oh, yes. So the primary navigator needs to be updated because all we have is demo in here. We don't have details. So I'm going to change demo screen to detail screen. Demo screen is just something that comes out of the box. All right. So our navigator now knows about the new file. And this obviously is not what we want, but at least it's going to the new screen. Okay. That second screen needs a header, so I'm going to configure that very quickly. Instead of header mode none, I'm going to say screen, but I don't want the first screen to have it, so oops. So I'm just going to say navigation options and header is null. Okay. So no header there, but when I tap over, I've got the header now. React Navigation is very cool, so if you use React Native, definitely check it out. Okay, cool. So, but we need to actually provide the detail screen with the player that we tapped on, because right now it's just kind of like, I don't know, what'd you tap on? You know, it's just a bare screen. So we're going to go back to our RouteStore, where we kind of started this thing, and we're going to say current player. Now, I'd normally put this in probably a different store, but for the purpose of this demo, this is what we're going to do. Types.reference because we don't want another copy. We don't want to like copy the player into this property. We want to actually just reference it. And this is where this types.identifier comes in handy, because it's a string that identifies that particular player. It only stores that string in this other location, and we'll go and fetch it from the other spot. So types.reference player model. However, when you first start the app, it's not going to actually have a reference to another model, or it's going to be it's not going to be actually set. So types.maybe, wrapping around that, tells it it's okay if it's undefined. But we also need to be able to set what player. So I'm going to say set player here, and we need to take a player and self.current player equals player. So this is a custom action, and if you're used to Redux, it's sort of like an action and a reducer kind of put together into one thing, and it's really simple. Like, and you can only mutate a store or a model within an action. That's one of the beauties of MobX State Tree. And this gives you a really cool place to do it. Very simple. So if I go back to the welcome screen, and right before we navigate, if I say RouteStore.setPlayer, and then in this case, item, it's called item because that's what we're getting, it will set the player before we go there. And if I go to the details screen and output RouteStore.currentPlayer, I need to import that, or my use stores thing. RouteStore, uncomment this up here. That was not set up for the demo. That's actually just what you get when you generate a new style, or a new new screen. So if I go to objects are not, my bad. We need to do their name. Okay, Yusuf Nurkic, cool. If I tap on Zach Collins, I get Zach Collins. And if I go to Mario, I get Mario. So you can see here that before you navigate to the new screen, you can set your application state, and then you can read it from your new screen. Everything re-renders as you would expect. Okay, so I have some time. So I'm going to, I'm not going to spend it styling the second screen. I'll leave that as an exercise to you, because you're probably better than me. But what I will do is I'm going to, so right here I would normally like output all of their stats and like more information about them. That's pretty straightforward, so I'm not going to show that. What I am going to show is how I can interact with this player. So I'm going to add a button. Preset, let's see here, actually I need to import that so I get all my add there. So preset equals primary. This is, again, something that's coming directly from Ignite. This is a preset up component. And then text style, text style, I think that's right. Font size, let's say 20. And text is favorite. So what I'm doing here is I'm going to set up a button that, if this works, I think it's title, not text. Okay. Sorry about that. This will work. Okay, cool. So we have a favorite that's probably a little bit small to read. Sorry about that. On the screen, let me see if I can bump that up a bit. It is not really cooperating right now, but that's okay. So we have a button, and I want to say, like, okay, I'm getting to know these players throughout the season. I want to favorite this player because they're one of my favorite players, or I want to unfavorite them. And on the main screen, the one that you can see on the Android simulator, I want to actually put stars by the names of the people that I've favorited and list them first. So this is a bunch of data manipulation that needs to happen behind the scenes based on one click of a button. So the button itself, I think okay, yeah. So the button itself takes a prop called OnPress. And what we want to do is let's go ahead and destructure this. Const player equals RouteStore, or not destructure, I'm just going to current player. So it makes it a little bit shorter to work with. So I want to call like player.toggle favorite. In order to do that, I need to go back to my RouteStore, my player model, and create an action. Self and toggle fave. All right. Let's set an actual property here called fave, types.boolean. But we're not getting the fave property from our API. So we need to tell MobX state tree that that's okay. At runtime, it would error if it tried to initialize a new player and it didn't have this fave property if you don't do this. So types.optional, we're not using maybe, false, because we want to set it to false if we don't get it. Okay, so some of you may actually be kind of ahead of me here. Self.fave equals not self.fave. Pretty simple, right? We're just talking about it back and forth. And in the details screen, toggle fave. But we want to be able to set the title based on whether that is a favorite player or not. So the title of this button. So fave, if it is a favorite, then we want to unfavorite. And otherwise, we want to favorite. So I'm going to refresh this and go into Kent, favorite, unfavorite. It's hard to see, but it is working. Favorite, unfavorite. All right. Now on the first screen, we want to re-render. And one of the things you need to do when you're working with MobX state tree, if you want your components to basically know when properties in your stores or your models change and re-render, is to use MobX React. Import observer from MobX React. This is actually one of the coolest things about MobX, in my opinion. The fact that you can simply wrap a function component or a class component in observer, and now it knows all of the properties that you're using within your component, and only when those properties change in your store, it will re-render. This solves a whole class of performance problems that you get with Redux, and if you use context directly. You can make performant apps with Redux and context directly. We have, but MobX just makes it so you don't have to think about it. It just works. MobX React does. Okay, so so we want to put it like a star next to their name. So item.fave. Remember, we're calling this item because that's what we get from React navigation. So if they are fave, we want to put like some sort of a star here. That one. Otherwise, we're not going to put anything. And additionally, instead of accessing the data like RouteStore.players, we actually want to grab from RouteStore a view of the data. So MobX state tree will allow you to manipulate your data and use, in other systems they call it like a computed property. It basically is like, we already have all the data we need in the RouteStore. We don't need to like change the RouteStore. That would be kind of unnecessary just for this one place. So we're actually just going to have a view into the data. You'll see that in a second. So we want players by fave. And I need to make that RouteStore. If I go down here and say views, it's kind of defined essentially the same way as an action. You have this kind of self and then return an object. So players by fave, and then I would return self.players.sort, and then A, B. This is sort of like a sorting function. So like A.fave, if it is, -1, otherwise 1. That basically just sorts it. The favorites will be at the top. And then I'm going to actually make this a getter. So if you're not familiar with this, newer JavaScript has the ability to say get and then the name of a function. And instead of calling that function, you can just specify it like a property, and it'll work as you would expect. So you'll notice right here in, whoops, wrong screen. You'll notice right here, I'm not actually like putting parentheses after this because it's a getter function. Let me refresh, and then I'm going to favorite Hassan Whiteside. He's at the top and has a star by his name. If I go down to Pau Gasol and favorite, yes, he is on the Blazers randomly. Damian Lillard, I'm going to favorite him as well. And if we go up to the top, we now have our 3 favorites. They're at the top. They have stars by their name. This is basically you know, the communication between different parts of your app and your between different parts of your app using MobX state tree. We'll make sure that Android works as well because, yep, there we go, favorite, and Kent is now at the top. I think that's about it for what I'm going to show you today. I hope that what you got out of that was, number one, you know, React Native itself isn't that different than React. Yes, you have to use, you know, view instead of div. You have to use touchable opacity instead of buttons and things like that. But you can learn those differences pretty quickly. Otherwise, it's pretty much just React. It actually has a copy of React built into it. Also, I want you to check out MobX State Tree if you haven't. It's a very cool system. MobX State Tree, it's powered by MobX underneath the hood. And then you also have MobX React. If you are interested in how all of those things interact along with React navigation, check out my talk from last week at React Native EU, where I kind of explain all of that. Check out Reactatron. It does work on web as well. It's especially useful for React Native projects. And definitely come up to me during the conference. I'm happy to chat about any of this stuff. Oh yeah, and also Ignite. Check out Ignite. Let's see. And you will be able to learn more. I'll put all these links up at some point. There's going to be, you know, I'll put the slides up so that you can check out the links. And there are some Infinite Red links as well. You can find me on Twitter. Thank you very much.